Welcome, everyone, to our webinar, which I entitled, What's Holding Back My Spiritual Evolution? I was prompted to do this topic because I live in a community of people who have been seeking spiritual evolution, most of them for 3 or more decades, some of them 5 decades now. And it's been a long time. And some people ask themselves the question, why, having devoted decades to spiritual progress, am I not enlightened yet? And most of those people have good experiences, usually in program, and some of them have them even when they're not in program. But there's still a sense that we haven't arrived at the goal yet. And the question is, why? And there are a number of factors that become apparent to me when I'm working with people in my practice that suggest that in one way or another, people are holding themselves back. And I thought I'd explore some of those ways tonight. And then during the group clearing session, we'll look into the specific instances for each individual. Quietly, shall we say, not out loud, and try to remove some of those obstacles. But we'll take a half an hour here to talk a little bit about the things that may be holding back my spiritual evolution for each of us individually. Now, clearly, excuse me, I'm going to take a little sip. I'm a little grumbly tonight. Clearly, one of the things that holds us back is simply our karma. And many of us are dealt with a very difficult set of cards, so to speak, a very difficult hand in terms of spiritual evolution. We may be challenged by health issues, finances, relationships, career problems. I remember somebody describing that they had career attention deficit disorder, and they kept shifting their careers. So there are many, many different ways that karma can present us with a path that requires a great deal of our attention, in the sense that even though we may be making some progress on the subtle level of our existence, that on the gross level of our existence, we're working very, very hard and spending a lot of our energy and our time. In my field, of course, in the health field, I saw a lot of people challenged by health issues, and many truly found it very, very difficult. Chronic health problems, and then oftentimes at some point in their life, something much more acute would come up. And so these kinds of things can really make it feel like spiritual progress is very, very difficult. From my clinical experience, I can think of so many examples of people here in the community who really are very sincere in their desire for spiritual evolution, but who literally battle to stay healthy and be able to participate in meditation and other activities for spiritual development, because their health is just so precarious. And so, things are so difficult for them. So those kind of karmas can really make things very difficult. Now, a lot of us face challenges that come up in life, and we say, oh, it's our karma. And we may even have a consultation in astrology that, that it gives us some indication that, that this is the kind of thing that we're going to be dealing with at this time in our life. And we tend to speak in terms of good karma and bad karma. Good karma is the karma that we find enjoyable, and bad karma is the karma we wish didn't happen to us. And of course, as we go through evolution, as we've heard, our karma comes back to us in this lifetime and even from past lifetimes. And so we often have to face the reality that things happen. stuff happens, as they say, and it's a it can be very, very difficult for us, and we wish it didn't happen. So we call that bad karma. But excuse me, that's really not a very useful way of looking at karma. A much more useful way of looking at karma is to think of it as opportunities to learn major life lessons, and to pay back, as it were, or to receive, if you want to think of it in a positive way, that, if it's a good experience, to take advantage of things that karmas that we have earned in the past that are helpful or supportive to our evolution. Everything actually is supportive of our evolution, but some of it is just not as much fun, shall we say, as other aspects. And uh, it's important in terms of dealing with our karma that we not resent it, because the resentment of karma and the particularly blaming of people or events or even God, of what's happened to us, actually really is a very powerful energy against our evolution. The energies of resentment, bitterness, are feeling hurt, and feeling powerless, are very, very powerful energies that very much interfere with our spiritual evolution. And so, like Job from the Bible, we have to be willing to accept what comes to us and continue on our path as best we can without, we deal with what we have to deal with. And you remember the story of Job, which in my sense, virtually no one has ever actually read. I did actually read it a couple of times because it's a fascinating discussion of karma and the laws of karma and what it means. And the way it unfolds is that Job starts to lose everything. He loses everything he has. He loses his family and his wife and his children and such, and he loses his estate, and he loses his position in the community, and he basically winds up with nothing. And people come by and have conversations with him, and they basically follow the traditional interpretations of karma. Oh, you must have been a sinner, and you must have done things that you won't admit that you've done, and you're not being honest with yourself, and so they go on and on and on about these things. And it's a long story. It's one of the longest stories in the Bible. um, and Job maintains throughout that he was not a sinner, that this is just something that he has to go through. It's God's will, and he just accepts it. And towards the end, he gets a little impatient, and he complains to God. He said, if I have taken all of what you have sent to me in the way of all of these losses and suffering of health and so on and so forth, if I've taken all of that, I deserve to see your face. And so in the fourth book, as they call it, the fourth chapter of the story, it may be the fifth. I may have lost track of which one is which. God finally says, look, you don't get to tell me what I have to do. And he does a couple of things to demonstrate to Job that he is the Almighty. And the two things that he does that are really quite striking is he makes him into a behemoth and a Levanthian. And a behemoth is a monstrous land animal, and a Levanthian is the same thing in the ocean. It's a huge sea creature. And he turns Job into one and then into the other, to demonstrate to him that he can do whatever he wants with Job. And then Job becomes very humble, and then God reveals himself in his almightiness in this way, and Job kind of gets what's going on. And then in the fifth book, everything is restored to Job, and because he's been one who did not lose faith. So many of the things that challenge us greatly in life are tests, not just of our ability to stay focused on our evolution, but also of our faith that what is happening is what is supposed to happen. It's God's will, and that we can deal with it on a practical level, but we have to accept it. We cannot resent it or resist it. We have to just go with it and work with it. And it's important to understand it's not just being passive. Oh, I just accepted this terrible stuff that's going on with me, my poor health or my lack of relationships and or my loss of wealth or whatever it may be, or lack of wealth. It's not just accepting that it's like that. It's taking that and working with it. There's an active component to that. And that's what turns around the energy that underlies that. And so all of the work that I do, what I find is that when we deal with this kind of an energy that is blocking us, that what happens is that it opens the person to new ways that they'd never thought of manifesting who they are and what they want to do with what they have. And rather than lamenting what they don't have and complaining and blaming and all of those things, just going with it and just living their life as best they can, as fully as they can, and with as full a heart as they can, so that they do not suffer. Okay, that's enough on karma, I think. If there are any questions from those of you out in cyberspace, you can put them in the chat function. There's at the bottom of your window. If you're using the video, I think if you do *6 on the phone, you may be able to speak. I'm not sure about that. But on the video, at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat button. And if you click on that, it gives you a little window. You can type your message in, and I will become aware that you are sending me a message. I don't see anything yet. So I'm going to continue on. Good, that worked properly. So I have my chat window open now so I can see when you write to me. And the next thing I want to talk about is spiritual bypassing. I've spoken on this before. Somebody sent me a oh, thanks for the compliment on the photo. Appreciate it. I've talked about spiritual bypassing before, and it's a very it's a big challenge, actually, to overcome. What spiritual bypassing is avoiding life, is avoiding the challenges that have been thrown at you that you're supposed to use either to pay back a karmic debt or to learn a life lesson. And one of those life lessons can just be the lesson of faith. And so spiritual bypassing, typically people simply avoid confrontation. They avoid confronting whatever it is that's a problem. And sometimes it's avoiding conflict in life. And life is just to be mellow. We're not going to get into any kind of confrontation with anybody, any kind of difficulties. If there's any differences on politics or diet or lifestyle or where you live or how you relate to your family or not, that those things you kind of just put them aside and you say, I'm going to just meditate, or whatever your spiritual path is. And then you just don't deal with life. And life doesn't seem to be set up that way. When we're tossed challenges, it's for a reason. Again, they are to better seen as opportunities to learn and to grow and be able to function better in life. And if you find yourself perhaps not talking to your relatives or certain of your relatives, or making sure that all your friends are very much like you and don't challenge you in any way, they aren't what sometimes proverbially we call interesting. If they're, all your friends are just very pleasant people, which is not a bad thing. But if it's like that, then there's this sense that you're not really dealing with stuff. And it's often very hard to recognize this. I think this is one of the most difficult, actually, of the blocks to recognize. That's actually very personal, because oftentimes, while there may be some sense that this is a karma, it's also very much a personal decision. It's something you've decided to do so that your life is peaceful and happy and not challenging. You're basically avoiding the challenges. So that's spiritual bypassing. Just going to check one thing here. Okay. And then moving on to, oh yes, one of the other, I don't know which is the more challenging, spiritual bypassing, that is not recognizing that you're doing that, excuse me, or being absorbed in your story or stories about your life. And again, this is something I've talked about in many webinars, and it's something I run into a great deal. I like to think sometimes that maybe one of my skills is to recognize when someone is caught up in their story and to help them recognize that, which means that they have to learn that what they're doing is being caught up in a story, and then recognizing what the story is and what that story is about and what they need to learn to get out of that story. But what does it mean to be caught up in your story? Well, the way I usually hear it actually is that people start telling me their story. Think of it this way. You go, somebody's laughing here. You go out in Fairfield, you go downtown, for instance, or you go to the grocery store and you run into an old friend. Hi, how are you doing? 20 minutes later, they're still talking. Okay, that's being caught up in your story, right? They're telling you all about the challenges and the suffering and the concerns and the problems with their kids or the problems with their finances or the problems with their housing. There's too much mold and it's not big enough and they got too much clutter and so on and so forth, whatever their story is. And they just go on and on about it. It's not the going on and on. It's the fact that when you ask them something, what you get is a story back, and they're completely into the story. This is who I am. And it could be any number of stories. It could have a financial story and a housing story and a relationship story and a health story. So they can go on and on and on about these things. And the point is that they see themselves, or to turn this around, if I may, you see yourself in this way. It's as if you're wearing a certain set of glasses and everything looks green or blue or gray or brown or whatever. You're seeing life in a particular way, and it holds you. And that's the whole thing about it, is that the energy of your story is holding you in a particular pattern that you can't break out of because you don't realize you're in it. And you don't have the skills or the knowledge of how to get out of a story. The first thing, obviously, is you need to recognize that you're telling yourself a story or you're telling somebody else a story. But really, when you're telling somebody else that story, you're telling yourself. And it's usually in the form of a complaint. Sometimes you're indicting somebody else. You're being critical of somebody else. But that's another kind of complaint. You're complaining about others. You're blaming and complaining, and what I call indicting, which is accusing others of things. And you're just going on and on with that. And one of the things you have to do then is to step back and say, what am I doing? Oh, I'm describing my life situation or some aspect of my life situation. And then in that stepping back and looking at it, you go like, what is it about this that I'm really dealing with? Am I angry? Am I hurt? Am I lonely? Am I frustrated, that I'm not accomplishing what I want to be accomplishing? So you deal with these things as when you can step back and look at them, and then you can see that they're there. And if we're doing that in a session, then what I'm doing is helping you shift the energy that underlies that so that you can really become a witness to your experience. And then you can describe that experience with objectivity. You can describe how you feel and what it means to you, and then you can begin to move on and figure out what is it I need to do. And when that stage comes, then you get into another area that is another big obstacle to spiritual evolution, and that are the counterproductive rules and beliefs that one holds. And those are called, in modern parlance, memes. That was a word I had to learn just a few years ago. We didn't have that when I was learning all this stuff way back. And memes are these rules or beliefs that we have about how life is supposed to be. Now, memes are not necessarily a bad thing. We need memes to navigate through every day. We need to have rules about, we brush our teeth when we get up and when we go to bed, and we do this, that, and the other thing. And that's necessary to do for our good health and our well-being. And of course, we have all kinds of rules, like traffic rules, right? And those are things that we internalize, not the rule. We do internalize the rules, but that's not the point. The point is we internalize the concept that in order to drive safely, I have to follow the traffic rules. So that's the meme. And we sometimes call that conscience or responsibility, a sense of responsibility. And so we have all of these rules that we use to navigate life. But we also have a lot of rules that oftentimes have no objective basis. They're rules that we get from our parents, from our surrounding community, and oftentimes they're rules about who we do and do not associate with, what we say or don't say about our money, our wealth. One of the rules, for instance, typically is that we don't talk about how much wealth we have. We don't say how much we spent on something. Sometimes we slip up a little bit and say, I spent a pretty penny on that. But we don't tell people what it actually was. And so that's one of the social rules, that we confront. Let's take another sip. And so we often don't recognize the rules that underlie our behavior, the way we conduct ourselves. We really, most of us are not very introspective about why we do things or say things that we do. That is what it is that's motivating us. We just go on about our business. We just say what we think. And many times we just leave off the understanding that, I'm doing this because I learned that, I'm trying to think of an example. It's funny, my mind just went blank about examples. I don't want to think about memes, but one has to think about them. And that's kind of my point here, is that, excuse me, that we often forget to look and say, why do I do that? Is that true? If we have a belief, is that true? How do I know it's true? Those are big questions. Is it true? How do I know it's true? And sometimes when we really look at it, we discover that there is nothing true that underlies our belief. We just hold a belief. Some people worry a great deal about safety, is one that's fairly common. And they follow certain rules about, you have to do this, have to do that. It's like, if I ride my bicycle, I always have to have a helmet on, and I need to have knee pads and maybe elbow pads and whatever, for protection. And others of us might look at them and say, well, that seems to be, it's not that it's wrong, it's just overly concerned. And you say, well, why do you do that? Well, because I have to be safe. Something might happen. I might have an accident. Somebody pull out of a parking space and, bump me and I'd knock me off my bicycle, and then I'd go rolling down the pavement. And so this will protect me, which is not untrue. But the question is it reasonable? What are the chances of that happening? In urban environments, it's a fairly common thing to have bicycle accidents, bicycle car, motor vehicle accidents. But in Fairfield, for instance, those things are quite rare, actually. So the question is it reasonable? So the question is then, have we stopped to ask, is this meme true? And if it's true, how do I know it's true? And if it isn't true, then what do I do? Can I loosen up a little bit? Maybe it's a good idea, but maybe not one that I have to compulsively follow in order to actually feel safe. Because what we're really doing is trying to make ourselves feel safe, not be safe, right? I mean, wearing a helmet is a good thing on a bicycle. And I certainly would recommend that as a retired pediatrician. I still hold that recommendation that kids and adults wear helmets when they ride bicycles. But that it's necessary only when you have an accident, but you have to be wearing your helmet when you have the accident or it's not of any use. So it's practical and it's reasonable to do that sort of thing. But all the other padding and everything else, yeah, if you're really in a difficult environment where the chances of being in an accident are fairly high, yeah, then it may be practical. But otherwise, it's not. And so you can go through that process of looking at it and just objectively saying, oh, no, it's not really necessary. This is overdoing it. And I don't have to do that. Or you may come up with a rule that is completely untrue, has no truthful basis underneath it. And so when you ask that question, is it true? And how do I know it's true? And you wind up as, oh, it's an old wives' tale. Is that really true? No. Data that has been collected since there were old wives, long ago, since data has been collected, says no, it's not really true. It's not really valid. So you don't have to do that. You can free yourself then of that obligation and free yourself of that burden, because it's good to do that, because the energy that's bound up in living by rules, and I'm sure all of you know someone who has so many rules that you have a feeling, you just have this feeling, they can't really live. They're not really happy because they're spending so much energy just trying to follow their rules that I would never follow, or certainly not as strictly. So the energy, again, that's bound up in following the rules and the blocks that the memes can put in our lives that keep us from being flexible. They make us so rigid in certain areas, or if we have a lot of rules in all areas, those rules can really keep us from being able to enjoy life and live our life and in an expanding way, so that our evolution, our spiritual evolution, is upheld. And, there are people who even have rules about their spiritual evolution, of course. I have to do my meditation morning and evening. It doesn't matter what other responsibilities might possibly be needing attention at that time. I'm going to meditate. And, as a pediatrician, again, I saw parents who would just, do something to get the kids busy, and then they'd go meditate. And then they get angry if a child came, "Mommy, I need attention," for whatever. And they created situations that brought tension in the home rather than an easy, comfortable environment. And it is tricky being a parent. I understand that. And it's nice to have the idea that it's good to get your meditation in twice a day. But if it's a rigid rule that winds up hurting the kid's feelings, not just once, but repeatedly, that it's probably a rule that needs to be bent. And most parents who are listening to this have been through this and have probably resolved it very satisfactorily. But it is one of the things that I saw as a parent, that was a rule that was creating tension in the family that just didn't need to be there. So let me stop here and see if there are any questions either in the room or online. Again, if you use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, you can send me a message. And I may even be able to allow you to speak. Let me see if that'll work. I think I did this last time. How do we? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody indicating they want to speak, and I haven't found the unmute everybody function. Thought there was one, but I don't see it. Anybody here have a question? No. If not, we'll draw this presentation to a conclusion and let you know that next month the presentation it'll be on September 10th. Sorry, I have to slip my glasses on to read the title. And the topic will be dealing with energy tangles, dissociation, energy leakage, energy leeches, curses, and other outside influences. And I've had a lot of experience with these recently, and I thought I would just share some of that experience and what the consequences of those things are. And it should be quite a fun webinar. So September 10th, next month, I'll be sending out invitations. Well, in truth, I'll do it when I get around to it, but it should be at the end of the month. So about 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks before the webinar. Okay, thank you so much.